Good morning. We'll start about this. It's a very exciting moment for me and for PUC and the people who are gathered here. This is going to be a very historic and important event in the history of PUC. And on the state of Mizoram, having had this galaxy of scholars, public intellectuals, and great minds put together. Many more will be coming. In fact, we have more than enough people to be seated here. Many of them we have to run them down because the hall is too small. Because the college is located a bit far off, perhaps they are caught up in traffic jam, so they'll be coming in a little corridor. Respected principal, Professor Islam Tanjara, our beloved principal of this college, Professor Dr. Naguera, from Australia, our special invitee, Professor Ramachandra Muhar, a renowned historian and biographer from Bengaluru, another special invitee, Professor Joyan Pacho from JNU, a very local lady, another renowned historian, and her husband, Mr. Ronald Hu. Where is he? Okay. So I would love to give you a special warm hug. Sibai. Professor Sanjay Hazarika, journalist and an expert on all this India, which I know him personally since my days. We render apology to him because of certain communication gap. He'll have ample time tomorrow to say his thoughts and ideas and to be with us. His name is not reflected here because of such technical issues. We have already communicated. Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen that in our world is tightly packed, so I won't take much time. We'll start by having our respected principal, Dr. Islam Tanjara, to have a welcome address. Professor Tanjara, let's give him a big round of applause.
Sibai, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, scholars, distinguished invited speakers, colleagues from our parent university, Mizoram University, and other colleges, representative of Mizoram History Association, my colleagues in the college, and students. A very good morning to each one of you. It is with great pleasure and a deep sense of gratitude that I stand before you as the principal of this Pacho State College to extend a warm welcome to the two-day international seminar on Voices Unbound, perspectives on social and beyond. This seminar, funded by our parent university, Mizoram University, marks a significant milestone in our academic calendar. Being one of the 6 international conferences and seminars organized by different schools within a short span of 3 months within this year in this college. I'm very happy today we gather not only to celebrate intellectual inquiry but also to forge connections that transcend geographical boundaries and foster a global exchange of ideas. Friends, I am particularly honored to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Duncan McBurry-Round, Professor of Urban Sociology from the School of Social Sciences and Humanities at the University of Newcastle, Australia. So, your wealth of knowledge and expertise will guide us to the exploration of perspectives of social sciences, history, and present. We are privileged to have him as a beacon of wisdom, illuminating the path for profound discussions and revelations in the coming days. We are also honored to welcome Professor Ramachandra Guha from Korea University. This seminar is graced by your presence. The research interests, his research interests, if I am not wrong, span from the social, political, environmental, contemporary, and even cricket history, as well as the field of economics. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be a speaker here in this international seminar. Thank you, sir. Professor Guha is an invaluable authority on the history of modern India. Of course, I am a man from a science background, but I learned that he is a very well-known scholar of modern history of India, and we are eagerly anticipate the insights he will share during this seminar. We are also honored to welcome Professor Sajalnath from Royal Global University, Gauti, Assam. Professor Joy L.K. Pacho, she is our sister from JNU, Delhi, and she helped this institution a lot in various ways. I am very, very thankful for her suggestions and advice I received over phone also. Thank you, madam. And also we are honored to have today Professor Sanjoy Hazarika, an independent journalist with specialist in Northeast India. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation. Their presence here further enrich the diverse perspectives that will shape our discussions over the next 2 days. The theme of our seminar, Voices Unbound, resonates with the spirit of intellectual freedom and the exploration of untapped perspectives in the social sciences and beyond. As we embark on the intellectual journey, let us embrace the opportunity to learn, engage, and collaborate, fostering an environment where ideas flourish and boundaries are transcended. I request my students to actively participate, not only by sitting inside the hall, but I request you to pay your full attention so that you can get benefited from the invited speakers and the speakers or the presenters. And also continue my research. Of course, just like Professor Duncan, is also a dean looking after the administration of the institution. I also still continue my research somehow. Of course, the speed is very slow. I'm happy to share this morning that one of my paper with my colleagues, which is a description of the new species of artworm, been recently, very, very recently published yesterday from New Zealand. I'm very happy to share the response. The subject editor itself is Professor Jeliason from Australia, and the journal is published from New Zealand. So, somehow, of course, in the college level, active research by faculty is difficult sometimes because we have to look after a huge number of students. About the college, you have in our roster. We have around 3,000 students, undergraduate students, and in some department also we have postgraduate, and also some department have a PhD course as well. So we are busy all the day from 9:30 to till dark. Anyway, I extend my sincere gratitude to our parent university, Mizoram University, for their generous support, enabling us to bring together us a distinguished group of scholars for this international event. To our speakers, participants and guests, I encourage you to make the most of this platform for exchange and dialogue. May the next 2 days be a testament to the power of collaborative thought and the boundless potential of Voices Unbound. Let me take this opportunity to thank the School of Social Sciences. This is the first time as a school we organize this international event. I thank the organizing team from the Department of Sociology, Political Science, History, Psychology and Public Administration, the head of the department and the faculty for their hard work and dedication. It is my privilege to work with a dedicated faculty who give their best every day for the students and for the college. Thank you, my colleagues. In conclusion, I extend my best wishes for a fruitful and productive seminar. May our deliberations lead to new insights, innovations, and collaborations that contribute to the advancements of knowledge and betterment of the society. Once again, I welcome
respected principal. Our next item is the inaugural address to be delivered by Professor Duncan. Professor Duncan Magura. I hope my pronunciation is correct. I don't know. All right, thank you, sir. Yes, our principal has already said he is from Australia, and he has done extensive research in Northeast India. I'm sure he is much more knowledgeable than me and many of us here. Once I go through his works, Borderland City in New India, Frontier to Canada, he has published, and others include Northeast Migrant Children, Race, Refugee and Retail, and Debating Race in Contemporary India, and also Ceasefire City, Militarism, Capitalism, and Urbanism in Dimapur. Other books also are there: Skateboarding and Urban Landscapes in Asia, Skateboard Video, Archiving the City from Below, and he has also authored several articles and essays, including publications in the Journal of Political Geography, Memory Studies, Geographical Journal, Modern Asian Studies, and Mobilities. Professor Ra is also an associate editor in the journals South Asia and Contemporary South Asia and the Asian Borderland Book Series. He is currently a member of the Australian Research Council College of Experts. Please join me in welcoming Professor Duncan to give exciting address to us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Lawson, for having us in the introduction, and I'd also like to thank my colleague, Dr. William Singh, who invited me to come. We've known each other a very long time, and it's a really difficult time for me to travel in March. So I initially said to William, I can't come to Iceland in March. This is just not going to happen. And he's very persistent, and he used our long relationship to emotionally blackmail me into coming. And so now I'm extremely happy that I'm here, and it's a really wonderful break from everything else that goes on in my work life. I feel very honored to be giving a keynote address, but I'm particularly honored because of the company that I keep here. And I just wanted to begin by telling you a very brief story, right? In that the first book on the Northeast I ever read was Strangers of the Mist by Senator Hazarika, who's right here. I never knew anything about the region, I just seen it on a map. And I really wanted to know more, and I wanted to find out about it. And I came across this book in a bookshop in India, and I read it kind of cover to cover. That was the first book on the Northeast I read. I would say the fourth book, sorry Ron, it was probably the fourth because it had just come out into order and Amazon didn't exist back then, was Ramchandra Guha's Savaging Civilized, which is about Barry Eldon, a British anthropologist who worked in the region. And I learned a lot from both books, and I particularly learned that the white man in the hills among the tribals is something I really don't want to be, right? It's a colonial relationship I don't want to reproduce. And so I think it's really important when you see what my interests have been, you see where I've gone. I wanted to think about things at a different scale. And away from the kind of fermented soy and the bamboo, which really brought me to the concrete and the asphalt of Northeast India, to the urban environments which are proliferating across the region. And what I really want to talk about today. But not to be outdone, Joy Patel invited me to my very first conference on the Northeast when I just finished my PhD, which was on Mekhalab, on the Khasi Hills. At JNU back in, I think, 2007, 2008. So these two other speakers have had such a huge role in my own journey in researching Northeast India. And so to be here with them is a really wonderful thing for me. It's very, very special. And the connections and contacts I made through that very first seminar on the Northeast, many of them are my friends to this day. Many of them are people I've been able to bring to Australia for different things. And maintain really strong connections and relationships. And so it's really wonderful for me to be with them today. Okay, so I do a lot of weird work, right? And my knowledge of Mizoram is very small. So I thought I'd just give you a caveat at the beginning that the majority of my work would probably be classified to be around migrants, to be around cities, and to be around the everyday in the region. And I mean the everyday in the kind of sociological sense, less the anthropological sense, like what people eat and where they sleep and that kind of thing. But much more in the environments people live in, how they move about them, the relationships these create, the relationships they live in. And I guess I work at the intersection of sociology and what's probably called social and cultural geography nowadays. But it's really about the relationship between the social and the spatial. And so I've written a number of books on Northeast India, 3 on my own, Northeast Migrants in Delhi, which came out about a decade and 12 years ago. Debating Race, which was a much shorter book that followed up from conversations that came out of that book. But in the background, there are 2 books on cities in the Northeast. Borderland City in New India, which is about Imphal, which was a difficult to write, difficult to do research, but really challenged me to do research in different ways. And Ceasefire City, which I wrote with my friend and colleague Dolly Kikon, which is about urbanization after conflict, relatively speaking. So I just wanted to sort of flag those, that's the direction I come to. I'm not really an expert on deep culture. I'm more an expert on, well, I'm not an expert on anything, but I'm more interested in spaces, cities, and in everyday. But in the time since, I've done a lot of really strange stuff that's not necessarily centered on the Northeast. And I want to mention it because it's relevant to what I want to talk about today. So here are some pictures from my fieldwork in recent times. I've done work on concrete in the Himalaya, with my colleague Mona Chetri from Sydney. I've done a lot of work on surveillance. I've done work on private hospitals and cross-border medical migration. And then I've done, as Ram has had a cricket turn, I had a skateboarding turn, and began to think about what play can tell us about urban space. And that then brings in a lot of work on surveillance, a lot of work on defensive architecture, and a lot of work on do-it-yourself or DIY spaces. I've then done a little bit of work on robots and AI, particularly sort of backroom data, and the workers in backroom data. And a lot of that was inspired by work I've done in Northeast Migrants about BPO workers. So these threads that I've brought from the Northeast have then gone back into this other work. And I'm at a stage in my life now where I'm trying to bring these weird threads back into thinking about the Northeast. So, I'm from another part of the world. I think a lot of my adult life has been shaped by my time spent here. So like any good boy from the Northeast, it's time to come home and think about how some of these threads might help me make some points going forward. So when I asked William about what I should speak about, he said anything. After this talk, he may regret saying anything. But the paper is a bit experimental. It's not a well-rehearsed paper that I've given lots of times before. It's not a short shot. It's not well dusted. It's full of impulses. It's full of glitches. But as such, it resembles the kind of spaces that I want to talk about today. And I really took the idea of Voices Unbound quite seriously to think about what that might mean. So I'm going to spend the talk thinking about sort of 5 frames of thinking about the Northeast as a space, or a series of connected spaces, okay? The 4th are, I think, quite well established. Well, 3 are quite well established, the 3rd is emerging, and then the 5th is the one I want to propose. It's something we can begin to think about more as scholars of the region, students of the region, people living in the region. I thought you might like this picture because I've taken about 40,000 photographs of cities in Northeast India for my work. I had to find one with something that had 5 in it, right? So here are my 5 frames. And I think this picture is also fantastic because it really narrates how settlement works on the outer edges of cities. In Dihu Park, on the edge of Dimapur. So you've got different communities in all of the directions to their different churches, and then you've got an ad for a meet point opening soon. And I think this really is a really nice way of summing up my time researching in Dimapur. But before I go into these 5 frames, there's a few assumptions here that I just want to flag. So the first assumption is that the Northeast is a thing that can be identified, right? We can think about it, we can imagine it, we can point to other imaginations of it, and we can analyze it spatially, right? So we've got to have that assumption that there's something about it, right? It might be thinly constructed, but when we talk about it, people seem to know what we mean. The second assumption is that the Northeast is imperfect. It's an imperfect social concept, an imperfect spatial concept. It's not all the same, as you know, being in Mizoram is not the same as places next door. It's not even the same internally. It's not even the same to the city and the rural areas. It's not saying the Northeast doesn't even think it's all the same, but we also think there's sort of something there, right? A shared experience of topography, a shared experience of geography that comes to matter. But I guess the third assumption is that with those 2 in mind, it's probably best for all of us to kind of hold some fluid spatial concepts when we think about the region. We might mean this kind of like bigger space. We might mean some cross-border space. We might mean some really localized spaces. But those things don't cancel each other out. right? We can hold them like juggling balls, right? We can hold them this way. And it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. And the last thing, my last assumption, is the 5 frames that follow are all valid. They're not mutually exclusive. They're all relevant. They all continue to be relevant. So we're not moving from past to present to future here. I want these 5 frames to be thought of as coexisting in the landscape, just like these signs. All right, I'll get started on number 1. So the kind of main frame which I learned to understand the region was the northeast is part of India. And in this frame, it's probably familiar to a lot of us, whether we think about the whole of the northeast, individual states, individual areas, districts, communities. The relationship that tends to dominate the spatial relationship is that the centre shapes the periphery, and the periphery responds. A lot of work is important here to think about Indian laws, the Indian Constitution, extraordinary laws, elections, reservations, quotas, the ILPS, public service state agencies, nation-building projects, state-building projects, railways, for example, and local governance forms, and their others, customary authority, how it's accommodated in different legal structures, etc., etc., etc. So this is a way I think we're comfortable with this, we understand it quite well, and it's very important, right? And its temporalities, there's a lot of historical work here, particularly in colonial and post-colonial state formation, but it's also very important for our contemporary understanding, okay? So I'm not going to go into detail about this, I'm just putting it there. It's been a really important frame for understanding the Northeast as a space, okay? The second frame, I should have put a warning that there's extreme close-up of the pork in this slide, but it looks much different when it's on my small screen. The second frame that's really developed is the Northeast as a lens, right? And from that, the Northeast becomes an alternative view of India. It becomes a different way, an alt lens for thinking about India. So in this case, peripheral perspectives are cast on the centre, right? Or the mainland, or however you want to think about the lands outside this space. And when I started working on Northeast migrants about 15 years ago, this was actually a tougher gig than you might imagine to speak convincingly. But it's now become, it's very well understood, very well accepted. There's fantastic work that does this. So this perspective helps us think about how the nation is configured, how those configurations are changing, how there are reactions to those changing configurations. We think about minority perspectives of the majority, minority experiences of the majority, race, racism and race debates, the ways in which race and gender refract certain experiences and understandings of the rest of India, sport, entertainment, key figures enrolled into national frameworks, sporting teams, sporting the mosaics, events, the Exodus in 2012, which many people here may remember, high-profile incidents, high-profile attacks, murders, etc., labour markets, violence, rights, faith, ideology, and a lot of this work is about representation, how the centre, how people in the mainland represent people from the region, and how people from the region challenge those representations. A lot on representation, a lot on signification. And the temporalities here are historical and they're contemporary. There's a little bit of future-directed work, but the majority is historical and contemporary. It's the kind of frame that I used when I did Northeast Migrants, also with debating race. They're both in this vein, and I think other scholars have now taken that work much further, in much more depth. But also the Great Indian Experiment by Arkaton Longkuma that came out in 2020. It's a really fascinating way of trying to understand Hindu nationalism from the perspective of this region, which is, I really recommend the book. It's really fantastic. And so in this way we get the periphery is shaped by the centre, and then you get the peripheral view on the centre. The third frame is the periphery as centre, which is the borderlands framework, which over the last 2 decades has really transformed research on the region. So we might use borderland, we might use frontiers, the terms are actually have different meanings, but for the moment we can use them interchangeably for today. And so that's when we begin to think of somewhere like here, where we're sitting right now, as a place that is connected across contemporary boundaries in deep and significant ways. Whether those boundaries are state boundaries or international boundaries. It denaturalizes both Indian territory, but also the region itself, the current boundaries of the region, and the alignment between ethnicity, language, and territory. Such incredible work has been done on this, and it's really opened up the study of the region, and way too much to mention here. But what's been crucial about it is that it allows comparison with other regions with similar histories, other frontiers, other borderlands, which are all unique, but they do have shared attributes. So it takes the study of the region away from just being about India or South Asia to being part of a larger comparative project on borderlands. Breaking the area studies lock, as Willem van Chendel wrote about way back in 2002, this idea of jumping scale, taking the region and comparing it with other things like it. I do think the comparative project has remained a little bit under-realised despite attempts, but the area studies lock does loom over us in ways that are really difficult to shake off, and even difficult for someone like me who's working in another part of the world to really shake off. And I think this is in part due to the continued dominance of area thinking. All of the things that Van Chendel pointed out 21 years ago seem to still loom. And if you don't mind a little bit of self-indulgence, at the end of the Ceasefire City book, my co-author and I just thought, every time we write about somewhere in Northeast India, we're constantly asked to say, yeah, but there are other places in India with bad infrastructure. There are other places in India with corruption and bad urban water supply. What makes this any different? And we thought, and as we were getting to the end of the book, we developed the courage to write something kind of directly about this. So we said, in our case, beyond the accounts of some failed infrastructure, we find making comparisons with other parts of India, especially other cities in India, very difficult. There is little about Dimapur that will help you understand cities in other parts of India. Can't help you understand large cities like Chennai or Kolkata, or even similar-sized cities like Dehradun or Mangalore. So despite the major advances in area studies in the past 2 decades that have challenged national, regional, and geographical boundaries, we're still compelled to turn Dimapur and other parts of the Northeast back through national frames of reference, noting that scholars in similar sites in mainland India are not required to explain how their work may be relevant to the Northeast. Indeed, it would be far easier for us to give in to temptation and offer a vague list of resonances between Dimapur and better-known cities in India. However, we believe cities offer us a better chance at liberation from straight-jacketed national and area studies by casting Dimapur as a frontier city, a borderland city, a ceasefire city, a zone shaped by decades of militarism, capitalism, and urbanism, a zone that resonates with similar urban environments across the globe. That's hard work. We felt even nervous about making those kind of claims. We're saying, stop making us compare to other parts of India. There's stuff here that matters to other places, but not necessarily to here. And so I think the Borderlands project is crucial, but I think it still has work to go. Okay. The fourth frame is perhaps the most exciting. One of the most exciting developments in the last decade, and even much more recent, is to begin to think of the region as an interspecies zone. And here our kind of human-centric notions of centre and periphery completely dissolve. It's the entanglement of species that matter, right? And the boundaries of this are really porous. And Joe Pachau and William Van Chendel's Entangled Lives, which is really one of the most phenomenal books written on the region ever, it really gives us a guide on how to do this. So here, centre and periphery is understood in the previous frames are relegated. And the centre of our frame that we're talking about is an entanglement of species in a spatial zone bounded by geographic and climatic features. Their focus is on the Anthropocene, and entanglements between human and other species that reconfigure spaces, and territorial forms like India, like the Northeast, like Myanmar, fade, in favour of what the authors talk about as a triangle, which they're deliberate that that's a heuristic device. Like that's a device to help us analyse, it's not a real thing on the ground. A gentle reconfiguration means that humans too fade from the centre of the frame, and the role of other than human organisms are brought into that frame. History itself is reconfigured, questioning sequential time, evidence, and temporal assumptions. And crucially, who and what does the telling is radically shifted in this perspective. In terms of the temporalities, this takes us into deep time, but also into history, modern history, contemporary time, but gives us a stronger sense of the futurity, of the future of the region through these entanglements. It's absolutely phenomenal work, and if you haven't read it, I really encourage you to do so, and hopefully Joe will talk to us more about it tomorrow. So that then brings me to what I want to talk about, the fifth frame, which is the Northeast as mediated space. So remember that slide I had, a lot of strange stuff I've been doing, right? It's brought me back to really thinking in this way. A lot of the literature that's sort of taking shape in the disciplines I work in, a lot of the things I end up reviewing, a lot of the grants I end up assessing, really begin to think about mediated space. And I'll explain what that is in a second. So here, center and periphery are best thought of as unstable objects. Sometimes at play, sometimes absent, but always being remanaged. So what is mediated space? I think my favorite usable definition is from Marcia England. England says, the mobile aspect of media and how this new flexibility affects understandings and normings of public and private spaces will become ever more important as it penetrates more and more facets of daily life. Mobile media change our geographical imaginations and mental mappings of the world around us. Our involvement with mobile media can create a disruption of the virtual and material boundary. And closely related to this is the idea of digital geographies. So the spaces of the region that we are familiar with, that you are familiar with, and ones we're less familiar with, are continually represented visually in mapping software, mobile phone apps, video sharing platforms, and other forms of peer-to-peer circulation. You know, finding maps of the region used to be impossible, but now users make maps in like 5 minutes, right? And not just of territorial homelands, but where the best second-hand clothes markets are, street food locations, where those backdrops for selfies are. So in discussing the relationships between the digital and the geographic, Ash et al. Suggests that spatial media mediate social encounters within spaces and provide different ways to know and navigate locales. Importantly, they do so in situ, on the move, and in real time, augmenting a whole series of activities such as shopping, wayfinding, sightseeing, protesting, end quote. And they add that spatial media alter the traditional basis of knowledge politics because they transform the nature of expertise in terms of who can generate spatial data. And to me, that's the really crucial point about Voices Unbound. Who is creating spatial knowledge of this region now is radically diffuse, okay? And that's what I want to get to. Now, this is a big field, it's a big corpus of data. There are so many examples. It's not collated, it's not archived, it's not housed. So the research has got to start to narrow things down a little bit. So I'm going to narrow my focus today for the last part of my talk. And you don't necessarily have to narrow this in the same way if you're interested in this, but I want to look at video as the media and cities as the space, which is fairly obvious, you know, considering my interests and my experience. So, my interest is in video cultures because video captures flow. And so much of the cultural knowledge of the region has been produced through static still image, particularly, you know, through museums and other things. Great work on that. Neves and Sakar urge scholars to pay closer attention to video cultures because they say video produces unstable and overlapping media ontologies. Unstable, overlapping. They're the two things to kind of keep in mind. Which glide between an enfold, industrial and amateur, legal and illegal, ratified and renegade, giving rise to multiple mediated globalities. So what they mean by that is the kind of spatial organization of life where we think people living here are here and that's the only place they are, is radically ruptured by this. People are simultaneously here but also elsewhere. They add that video thrives in a zone of limited resources and inspired improvisations, which to me sounds like the Northeast perfect. Fissured communities and explosive mobilizations, sounds like the Northeast perfect. Elastic topographies and asynchronous temporalities. I'll get to elastic topographies in a second, but asynchronous temporalities. Things don't happen in sequence. beginning, middle, end. There's just video, image, experience thrown on top of one another. Video cultures can be very localized, but they move between different contexts, different spaces, reflecting and generating regional modernities. And in turn, mediation enables a fluid relational approach to this region and to ways of being outside the region. So key to the spaces of possibility, or the counter visions of urban space, are amateur videos posted on YouTube. I just stuck with YouTube, it's easy to access. Instagram is a different thing. I want really stuff that's publicly available, that doesn't just go to people who are friends, but just is out there in the public domain. So video cultures are proliferating because of the small, unobtrusive, high-definition cameras that are now part of all of our devices, etc. But interestingly, videos that are shot from phones, tablets, etc., less standalone cameras, are so small that the people and the places being filmed rarely notice. And this is a really huge difference to ways of capturing people in past decades, where they were brought in front of a camera. An experience of sort of disorientation and violence that is well documented. So, I'm interested in video, and here are some videos of all kinds of video makers I follow in the Northeast, right? You get a lot of music videos, you get people visiting places and talking to locals about what's there, you get videos of big events, particularly big conferences, church conferences, etc. You get satire videos, you even get pictures of a Gerald being performed at the opening of a car showroom. The video down there's the video of real surrenders taking place in the Garrow Hills, and then you also have videos of singing and dancing traffic police in the dark night. Like, it is a wild world, okay, of representations of space. But for me, and given my background, I'm actually really interested in what this tells us about cities, and what it doesn't tell us about cities. And I've kind of called this the liveliness of time-space. And I guess to get at the liveliness of time-space, we need to think about our cities here as what we sort of say in urban studies literature, and you urban sociologists who I met on Monday would know this about socio-technical systems. So where I'm in Thrift really kind of brought this idea forward, where we see the city as a machine whose surge comes from the liveliness of various bodies, materials, symbols, and intelligences held in relation within specific networks of calculation and allocation, undergirded by diverse regimes and rituals of organization and operation. Let me translate that, right? The bodies, the objects, the symbols, all of those things, how they move through space, how they're networked and connected, and how they're connected outside the space itself. Yesterday, when I was visiting our guests on the 6th floor of the Agile Club, I looked out the 6th floor window and I went, oh, look at that socio-technical system, right? You really see it in Agile when you look down upon a place during the day. You think of all of the things that are moving there. It's not just bodies and vehicles. A lot of other things are being transmitted through that space. So I just want you to think about that when you next go out into the city. So, video captures this liveliness in splices of space-time. Okay? Video serves as archives of experience of the cities of our region, of the bodies, the materials, the symbols, the intelligences, right? But also the senses, the sounds, the sights. A long time ago, a sound studies scholar, when I gave a paper about INFAR, said, what does the city sound like? And I didn't have an answer. I never thought about it. I only thought about what it looked like. I never thought about what it sounded like. And descriptions of other senses that can't be transmitted through video yet. Smells, taste, touch. There are a lot of food videos about cities in Northeast India. So we're constantly being bombarded as we are in all kinds of media. Food. Crucially, it's not just the urban Northeast that gets mediated in video cultures from the region, but urban areas in other parts of India and other parts of the world, mediated by people from the Northeast and shared in networks back home and beyond. So cities become spaces for staging media. They have the surfaces, the objects, the textures, the landscapes, the soundscapes. Cities are the subject of that media. Photographs, videos, drawings, graphic novels, etc. In my case, videos where people explore the cities of the region. On motorbike, on foot, often face to camera, with drones, And the one on the right there is a plan for a new church. So even the imagined future city is an important part of video culture. And cities connect media. They host the cables. It's where you buy the screens, where you buy the hardware. So they're entangled in this really important way. They are live systems. And because they're live systems, they also black out. They also get shut down, as we've seen in our neighbouring state of Manipur. And they have glitches. It just don't work sometimes. So that also makes them living, moving, breathing systems. But what's also really interesting about this is that private spaces are mediated in ways that have been uncommon in research of the region, aside from really intrusive anthropology. People post their weddings on YouTube, they post them eating dinner, they post visiting a cousin's house. I didn't want to put any of those up there because it still makes me sort of slightly uncomfortable, but this blurring of the public-private and then making that part of the circulation of media about the cities is fairly unprecedented. So as spaces get mediated, as things get captured, circulated and consumed within and outside the region, we might ask, well, what's Northeast about this? What's Zoe about this? What's Naga about this? Or whatever. And I think the answer for me is the author, the author. The author is not always known. The person making, capturing the footage, editing is not always known, but it often is. They're often in the frame. Language is often a giveaway. The account, like the username, the account, where it's uploaded, what networks it's in, who follows it. It's not always obvious, but it's fairly obvious in a similar way that authorship is obvious, in informal way. So it matters less where video is being made, but who is doing the making, who is mediating space, who is watching is also something else to consider. But that opens a can of worms, or maybe we should say earthworms, that is beyond what I can get into today. But the watching also becomes an important part of this. Okay, so what do we do with all this? I've got 3 quick points to finish off. What does this give us? So I think the first thing it gives us is counter-visions about the region, right? Counter-visions about different spaces in the region and the people in them. Counter-visions foreground possibilities for radically plural ways of thinking with spaces, objects, and surfaces. They give us the opportunity to see beyond, but not always completely free of, static understandings of the public sphere, or of politics, or of ethnicity, of gender, of race, of faith, of what people in the region care about, want, and see themselves in the world, big and small. We can see through these counter-visions. Not perfectly, but not necessarily worse than ways that are written down formally. So, what we might say is that the cultural objects we've come to rely upon and lean on to analyse the region are being destabilised, shifting what constitutes a legitimate object, a legitimate space of inquiry, a network or relationship. So to put this in more plain language, mediated space generated by people in the region, viewed locally and viewed globally, helps us think differently about the standard assumptions that have been fixed in the region and its people. It's a fantastic video. It's in ISOL. It's about testing scooties. Women who test different scooties and rate them and review them. It's really fantastic. They talk about moving through space. They talk about the power of the engine. It's a really wonderful way of thinking about youth, mobility, culture, and urban life. The second thing I think it gives us is it gives us a sense of gaze that challenges the dominant gazes that have been fixed on the region for centuries. It doesn't completely replace and completely dismantle them, but like I said, it's an interesting counterpoint. So what I mean by this is people in the region have long been the subject of the gaze of others. Imperial agents, anthropologists, agents of the state, commercial agents like in the retail and hospitality industry, in advertising, tourism campaigns, film and television, news media. And there's been exceptional research on subverting this gaze and on ways in the community gaze on themselves and others. So Joy Williams' previous book, Camera as Witness, is a fantastic example about that, of Zoe and Mizo photography and the kind of modernity that demonstrates. Video cultures, on the other hand, shift the power of the gaze to locals gazing on their communities, on themselves, on places they visit, on their dwellings, on their environments, on their worlds. And they circulate those images through networks with designated, so sort of friended, and random audiences, public. It's quite different to, say, a curated exhibition, locally made film or local media reporting, because there's usually no editor, no publisher, no host, no gatekeeper. The region as a space or collection of spaces is presented unfiltered. But also, people outside the region have the power to capture and circulate their gaze on the region too. So we don't necessarily get out from under that problem of the gaze of the other. The same online platforms that host the videos I was showing are full of sexualized, exoticized, and stereotyped content in which local people are the center of that gaze. Videos actually intensify that gaze. But platforms and algorithms sort content in ways that bypass all of this content completely depending on where one starts, depending on what one clicks. And that indeed might be the only way to navigate this system of volume. Indeed, there's a whole subgenre of videos of people coming to the region from other parts of India and from abroad to hunt down stereotyped humans, stereotyped objects and experiences. Still, the external gaze has been so powerful in shaping the region and shaping the response and the critique of power is being destabilized. And mediated devices is such an important part of that. I think the final thing it gets us is it starts getting us into a shift away from topography towards topology. I'll explain what I mean about that in a minute. When I first started studying the region 25 years ago or so, topography dominated the way of understanding the Northeast as a region and its internal differences. Hills and valleys, upland, lowland, steep slopes, height, etc. Landlocked, isolation. And if you think about it, this is all really, really important. And from anthropologists to linguists to political scientists to geoscientists, topography is part of, if not always, the full explanation. An explanation for almost everything. It makes good sense, right? But what we can begin to see through this frame is a shift from topography to what we kind of say in urban studies, a kind of cultural topology, which is an idea borrowed from mathematics, away from physically calculatable space to dynamic relatedness between subjects, objects, subjectivities, and their experience that cross through and take space with them. Roger Shields called urban cultural topology a way of identifying new dimensionality regarding spatial and temporal relations, flows and transformations, accounting for the proper and improper, the legitimate and the out of place. So what Shields is saying is these things have localized manifestations. We're not all just suddenly part of a global stew of image and video, but that it changes the dimensionality of how we understand space. You might know these in similar ways. I wrote up with Lorraine in the 1990s, talked about scapes as a way of understanding relations and processes of multiple scales that are continuously in flux rather than fixed entities. A lot of globalization studies scholars were interested in this 20 years ago or so. You might also know these as heterogeneous assemblages or plural temporalities, depending on sort of what theories and things you look at. But I think it's much more simpler to understand. These are flows that move across space and originate in space. They shape places and they are in turn shaped by them. So, these are dynamic relations and mobilities that can't be contained by scaled spatial entities, such as territory, such as Mizoram. But this complexity does not equate to unknowability. It's possible to explore them, it's possible to analyze them, it's possible to read their cues. So to conclude, what does all this mean? What should you take from today, from me talking, and all of this quite obscure language about space and media? I think what we need to take from it is the study of the Northeast, at least in terms of space, has had really sort of 5 frames. As part of India, where centre dominates, periphery responds. As a lens for looking at India, where periphery critiques the centre. As a borderland, where periphery is the centre. And as an interspecies zone, where centre and periphery are relegated as human-centric ontologies in a more complex set of entanglements with other species. And finally, as mediated space, where centre and periphery are unstable objects, sometimes at play, sometimes absent. Does this help us? Does this help the study of the region? I think it does. I think countervisions are important. I think a sort of indigenous or localized gaze at the level of the everyday is important, not just at the level of the political. And I think it asks us to think about the region's cultural topology in relation to, but not contained by the physical space people are in. I think in a general sense, what it changes is the rigidity and the burden phenomenon that all voices in and of the region need to be political and constantly talking about politics. Gillian Rose, who writes a lot about this kind of thing, urges us to consider the popular, the prosaic, and the silly of everyday digital cultural production. And I think there's something in that is quite important to understanding society and where it's at now. But can we start here? Can we start with this kind of stuff and come to an understanding of the region that's transferable and viable and provable? And I don't think we can. I don't think the regional parts are knowable only through mediated content. We still need to experience space in conventional dimensions too. But conventional dimensional experiences need not be the only or even dominant data we use to understand space and place in the Northeast. Mediated space does give us good leads though. It gives us good ways of finding things, good directions to objects and relations we might not have taken seriously otherwise. And this is good news for you, especially students interested in researching the region in different ways. Because you're all entangled in mediated space yourselves. You know these dimensions intuitively. The challenge is that rarely have people in the region been granted permission to think of these entanglements intellectually or academically. So I hope that after today, at the very least, you'll begin to think a little more about the different ways space is articulated, circulated, and consumed here and from people here beyond. Thank you.
Professor Duncan, thank you so much. Now I have learned that Dr. William has given you the freedom to choose anything to speak on. So it's not the one that is printed. You know, it's all right. So that demonstrates our commitment to our team. That his voice is unbound. You know? Our voices are not bound at all. So it's about Northeast and it's very interesting. Thank you so much. I think I've done more. I've quoted the previous item, it is presenting our gifts to our honored and special invitees. I apologize again. Request our senior teacher, Mrs. Lourdes Jolikoli, Department of Sociology, to come on the stage and to present our gifts to our honored guests. Please call me. Please welcome on the stage.
Very good morning to everyone once again. To show our gratitude and appreciation, the organizing committee of this two-day international seminar on Voices Unbound, perspectives of social sciences and beyond, would like to felicitate with a small token our distinguished invited guests who were sitting on the dais, and Professor Sundar has regard to, for accepting our humble invitations and gracing even with their presence. To begin with, distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Duncan McDonough, professor in the School of Social Sciences and Humanities in the University of Newcastle, Australia. May I request our respected principal, Professor H. Kanzara, to do the honor and hand over the token. Please.
Stage left.
Thank you, sir. Next, Next, to felicitate our eminent invited speaker, Professor Ramachandra Guha, Distinguished University Professor of Kriya University, Andhra Pradesh. I would like to call upon Professor L. Chitwana, Head of the Department of Political Science, PUC, to hand over the token. Thank you, Professor. Next, I would like to request Professor Rick Paranathi, Head of the Department of Psychology, PUC, to felicitate our distinguished invited speaker, Professor Joy L.K. Pachwal, who is a professor in Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Thank you, ma'am. Last but not least, to felicitate our eminent writer, our retired professor and prominent journalist, Professor Joy Hazarika, I call upon Dr. N. William Singh, Associate Professor, Department of Sociology, PUC, to hand over the token. Distinguished Professor, Royal Global University, Assam. Also, our invited speaker will be arriving today and he will be felicitated tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Tony. Our next engagement is with tea and taking photograph. We start first by taking photograph. You remain seated there. We can move all of us here, but it takes a lot of time to remain seated. So we remain seated. We take photographs. After that, with some tea will come to you. Those of you who want to leave yourself, on my right, on my left side, there's a washroom for males and females. After tea and photo session, we have a speech from Professor Guha. We'll take
Stop na kami. Ha? Stop na kami. Situ.